Hey guys, Nate Ridgway here, and I'm going to be basically today explaining how to do a choose your own adventure story on Google Slides. Now, I know that a lot of people out there have already done things like this. I've at least provided tutorials on how to do so. I wanted to kind of show you a couple of other things you can do with it, but also then to really kind of provide a comprehensive way from the very beginning all the way through doing all the little technical things on how to make a choose your own adventure story for your students. Or if you're a student watching this, how you can make your own. So let's talk about advantages of a choose your own adventure story here first. Number one, they're extremely interactive, which is great, especially in my subject, history, where we tend not to generally interact a lot with history. We get to actually make choices and influence what people did or what they might have done differently. They're also super fun, and obviously, because it's a story, you can be super creative with them. Now, with all that being said, there's definitely some disadvantages here. Choose your own adventure stories, and really there's two kind of big problems. Is number one, they take time. And if you're not like prepared to spend a good deal of time with it, just be aware that there is a bit of a time commitment to actually making a product that looks like this. However, don't let that be intimidating, because you can make smaller stories at first and then kind of build on to longer ones from there. Second, you also have to have a lot of knowledge about the content that you're going to be writing about. Okay, so for example, if you're going to be providing students like options on what to do, those options should be realistic or give at least alternative possibilities for what's really feasible, I guess, in their particular circumstances. Okay, and this would really apply to English or science or math. You want to give answers that seem realistic. Now, let's begin on how you actually start making your story here. I have got my own, this is one of my own that I've made for my dual credit US history class, which is the 1920s Red Scare, and it's called Seeing Red. Now, at the very outset of doing a story, I would highly recommend thinking about what am I trying to tell? Like, what do I actually need to do? Okay, so in this one, the standard that I was trying to really hit, okay, and as you'll see this, I'll go into our instruction page here, and we'll talk about this here in a second. The game scores 3 items: accuracy to actual history, your oppressiveness or leniency towards society, and Americans' paranoia or calm. Okay, so what this game was designed to do, and I explained this to the students before we go into this, is that it's designed to really show you how, if you go after suspected communists in the country, depending on how, like, the more aggressive you are, the more Americans freak out because they think that communists are infiltrating the country. Okay, and so we kind of get like a positive relationship between those two things. So think about what you want your game to accomplish, because ultimately that's going to influence, obviously, the content that you put in the game, but then also the choices too. Okay, so from that point on, let's talk about planning. How are you actually going to make this thing a possibility? Okay, I highly recommend that you sit down with a bunch of flashcards or a piece of paper, and you begin to actually sketch out possibilities. And so, for example here, I'll just kind of like show you, a very basic one. So all I'm going to do is start scenario 1. I'll show you guys this piece of paper here in just a second. 2A, 2B, okay? And this could just be the very basic beginning of a story. Now, what I would likely probably do here is I would just take, and maybe write out like a small description of maybe each one of these things are. And then what I would do is on the lines, I would write what exactly that choice would be that my students are having to make that would get them to this result, okay? So again, this is one method you can do it. I personally find that doing them on a whiteboard at first was the easiest for me, because I needed the space. However, it at some points will definitely kind of look very chaotic if you have longer stories. And eventually, as you get more practice, you won't even need to make these kind of maps whatsoever. But doing early kind of planning it's very, very helpful. If you're a student trying this for the first time, a piece of paper can be a good place to start. But then also students and teachers, you can try something that a couple of my students did, and this was, I thought, really ingenious. And they took flashcards, and what they did is they did the scenarios or the choices that students would have to make. They put them on flashcards, and then what they did is they took string and they linked between the two. So basically, they just would tape them onto each flashcard, and then there would be kind of like a variety of choices. And you would still get that web, but it was much more tangible for them, and they could, physically move things around. So, again, that's your planning phase, all right? Also think about, like what happens when the story ends, right? Do you want to have them go back and try other possibilities? Is that simply going to be the end of the story? I generally try to make my stories looping, meaning that like when they get to the very end, they're forced to go all the way back to the beginning and then go try basically the choices that they didn't make the first time around, okay? And we'll talk about that here a little bit more in a second. So let's talk now about the technical stuff, okay? I, for a long time, used a really, really good software, and I should give them a shout out. It's a group called Ink. Okay, they made a product called Inkwriter, and it was absolutely amazing for teachers who were like trying to do this for the first time. However, it is disappearing as of August 2018, which is in like 3 days. So what I've had to do now, and I've been doing this pretty vigorously over the last 2 weeks, is having to convert them all over into Google Slides. And for me now, like having the chance to do this, I've gotten pretty fast at kind of getting used to how you do this in Google Slides. I'm doing a lot of copy pasting, but also like Google Slides offers some options that I didn't have in that software before, and that is you can obviously put quite a few more pictures. Okay, you have more room to display like instructions and those kind of things. And we'll kind of get into that a bit more in a second. Okay, so let's just talk about the basic structure of how I generally do this on Google Slides. First, I start off with a title page, okay, just a choose your own adventure story. And from there, no matter the game, I always give an instruction page just because if it's a product that I'm selling online, or if it's a student who's new in the classroom, or if because one of my choose your own adventure stories may be very different than another one that I give, is that I always provide this kind of page of, I guess, a roadmap of what to do. Okay, so I always do this one: click the icons to make choices, and I just go grab some free icons online. I highly recommend looking at the Noun project for that, and shout out to them because they make some really, really good stuff that's pretty cheap and affordable to use. And then click the city icon. So again, to go to return to the beginning. So that's like at the very end of my story, they click this and it would return them back to the very beginning. Now you'll notice that this game also has some extra stuff here down at the bottom. We'll get to this a little bit later. The game scores 3 items. We'll talk about that again later. And then last thing that I provide on this is click here to begin. Okay. Now you'll notice that it just jumped me to a next slide by clicking on that picture. Okay, this is not how it will look for students when they first open the game. And I can show you how to edit your slides so that when you provide the link to them, it automatically goes to presentation view and they don't get like this view where they can see the entire game. Okay, but basically what we're going to do is kind of get a preview here of what this is going to look like. Okay, and you can see it's laid out, it's clean, and it's pretty easy to use. Okay, and that's kind of what we're aiming for here, is that it's not confusing, it's accessible, it's understandable. Okay, so let me check my list here on what I want to talk about next. Okay, let's discuss icons. Yes, I should mention that. So the Noun project, or really Google, can be a pretty good place where you can nab free icons. I got all of these as just freebies off the internet. And I generally try to make them related to the game itself. This, again, being the Red Scare. I did 2 things of communism. One, because there's a lot of paranoia in this game. I did one on the Illuminati, because my students find that that's still funny, even though it's so old. And the American flag. Okay, so and these are the icons that students will use when it comes to the actual games to make choices. Okay, so if you see down here, this is an example of a actual slide that they are using in the game to make a choice. Basically, these icons are the things that move them on to the next slide. If you wanted to, you could make the text boxes themselves like the actual choices. And if you really aren't feeling the whole icon thing, there is one other option here. And if you go to shapes, there's a really nice shape for this that looks very similar to a button. And if you go here to shapes, it's right down here, and it looks like a button that you can push. And I just drop it in here. Looks like a button, and I maybe make it a little bit bolder, and that could be the icon that your students click. Again, much simpler, easier than maybe finding a picture out there somewhere on the internets. All right, so let's now talk about the actual linking. Okay, so essentially, how do we get our students, when they click this box or an option on this box, how does it get them to here, or here, or if they make an alternative choice, to this one right here, okay? And this is where the magic starts to happen in terms of like actually, maybe by magic I mean the time starts to happen, because this is something that again takes a fair chunk of time to actually make sure you got it right, and then to make sure that things are going to the correct places, and then you haven't forgotten one. Because if you forget one and then your students click on it, it will not take them to the right point. I'm going to open up another game here that I've been working on, just because this one's more complete, and you can see kind of like how I've got all of them linked correctly. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pull up the slide that has the first really whole bunch of options that they can make. Okay. Now, in your game, when you decide to give somebody a chance to make a choice, it's not like you have to send them to different locations every single time. Okay, so for instance, in this game that I made with students, which is on European exploration, there's different technologies that they could use. They could use a compass, a map, guns, or an astrolabe. Okay, however, I did not want to take the time, and I think it would be kind of a waste of time, to make alternative scenarios based on if you only had one of those four and not the other three. That's way too much. So instead what I did, okay, is if these icons, you'll see when I click on it, it says slide 7, slide 7, slide 7, slide 7. And that's because they all go to the same slide. It really doesn't have an influence on the game itself, even though it makes the students feel like it does. Okay? Now let's talk about how to actually make this happen. Okay? So on a Mac, it's Command K. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to, I guess. But if you click on the image, okay, and I'm going to move my face here out of the way. Click on the image, we go to Insert, and then Link. Okay, I recommend that you learn the hotkey to it because it's just going to save you time. Okay, but if I go to Control K here, it's going to pull up something like this, and it's going to ask me for a link. Now, I could, put in any link I wanted to here. I could link this out to a resource maybe that's posted in the game. Again, like, the things you post in the game don't always have to be like to other slides that students go to. It can be to outside resources and stuff like that, which can also make your games really interactive when you link to outside movies or videos and stuff. But set that aside. So anyways, if we want to link to a slide, okay, slides in this presentation, and even though, okay, and this is kind of an important point here, even though you'll see over here we're on slide number 6, and yes, we want it to take us to slide number 7, do not click where it says next slide. Okay, and there's a reason for this, and that is because, like, let's say for instance I had this option here, and I said, oh, I need to go insert another slide in between 6 and 7 so that one can link to the correct one. Well, what will happen there is that if I had selected next slide, it will always keep that as true, the next slide. So for instance, again, normally, right, in the first case, this was jumping from 6 to 7, and that's what we wanted. But if I insert a slide in between these two, let's call it 6.5, it's going to jump to 6.5. So I need to make sure, even though it's a little bit of a pain here, that I actually choose it to go from 6 to 7. And that's going to always ensure, no matter where that slide goes, what if I drop it to the very beginning or I drop it to the very end of the order, it's always going to go to that particular slide, no matter what. Okay, so that's one really important thing to know here. Okay, and again, you want to always make sure that you hit apply, that it's actually working. And if you want to check it real fast, you just click on it and it should say exactly where it should be going. Okay, now you'll see, okay, let's just go ahead and proceed along here. You'll see I do the same thing, 8, 8, 8, 8, because again, I didn't want to write too complicated of a story. And here's where things start to go differently. So you can see one of them is taking us to slide 20, and one of them is taking us to slide 9. Okay, and this is basically where, as you start to write your story, okay, I did this one last, so I just dropped in a new slide, okay, and I basically linked it to slide 9. Now, again, as a reminder, this actually was linked to a slide 9 at one time, but I did so much writing after this for the Portugal choice that this got pushed all the way to slide 20. Okay, and that's why it's really important that we link to a number and not to like next slide or previous slide or beginning or something like that. Okay, so last things here. Okay, you'll notice that I continue to keep using icons. Is that I do have that home button here where students can go back, and it takes them back to slide 3 at the very beginning. And you can see kind of why we had that home button, because students know that something has happened that's had to return them to the beginning of the game. All right, so that is like the basic tutorial on how to make a game. Now, there's a couple of things I'd recommend, I guess, if you're wanting to finish it from this point. Okay, and then I'll go on and kind of give you some further things that you can do with it here in just a second. I would make sure, first of all, that you play the game yourself. So actually go through, try all the options, make sure that it goes where you want it to go. Okay, because there's nothing worse than clicking on an icon and it throws you to the wrong slide, and then the story makes absolutely no sense and everybody's lost and it's a waste of a lesson. Don't have that happen. Make sure it's looking good and it's ready to go out the door when you've finished it. Okay, and last thing is that when we send it out to our students, okay, and this is a really important point here, because we're using Google Slides, we know that we can share things. However, we're going to change it a little bit. Okay, so when we click this button, Get Shareable Link, okay, and you copy this link, let's say you are ready to share it with your students, and I'm just going to open up a Google Docs, just very basic doc here. Okay, when you are ready to actually share it with your students, you're not going to give them that shareable link unless you want them to see like every single bit of your story, which if you want to, you're more than welcome to, but it's probably just going to be very confusing for them. Instead, what you're going to do, okay, is, and I'm just going to show you here because it's going to be a little bit easier to see, and let's just go and make a brand new doc. The button is hiding from me. Okay, is I've got that URL, and if I'm like, let's say I'm putting it into an LMS or I'm distributing it out to students some way, I'm going to take that URL and let me just paste it here so you can see it. Okay, and that looks like a mess, right? But there's a couple key words here that you want to focus on. It's basically, you have two options that you could do. You could give it to them right now and they could see everything you could do. And like they could see the entire story. You would just leave that as it is. If you want them to only be able to play the game, meaning like all they can do is open it up and boom, it goes full screen and they're ready to play it, you're going to take this word right here, edit, okay, and you're going to change this to present, okay, because what will happen then is we can go and paste this into our browser now, is it immediately goes into presentation mode. And that's really helpful because it skips a whole bunch of steps. Again, the whole idea is we make things accessible, we make it easy, we make it as streamlined as possible for them to get into the game and start the activity. Again, so, reducing transition times and all that stuff. And so that's one trick you can do. All right. Now, there's another one that you could do as well. Let's say that you're going to have students writing their own stories. I could go and make a template of mine. Let's say I just give them the icons to use. I give them the text boxes that they can use. I take care of all the formatting stuff for them, and that's a good way to kind of start with that. I could change this edit to copy, okay? And what would happen from here is if I go and paste this into a browser, it says, would you like to make a copy of Will You Survive? And it forces them to make a copy as soon as they would open up that link, all right? So to kind of two different options there in terms of distributing that you can take with you. Let's talk about some advanced stuff. Okay, and for the first one, props to Matt Miller for showing me this. I had never thought about doing this, and I never thought about like the mistake that could happen with this, but there is a mistake that can accidentally happen. Not really that's your fault, but it's the fault of the students when they're playing. Okay, so let's say I'm in this game, okay, and you know, students are playing it, and they accidentally click on the screen that is not an icon. Okay, now what would normally happen there is would send them to the next slide. Okay, now students don't know that they made a mistake. They might have thought they clicked on it, they don't know that they missed, and then all of a sudden trying to get them back to where they should have been so they can go and click the button, it's a huge mess. Okay, so what you're going to do here, and this is, again, advanced stuff, so again, once you've like started making stories and you're comfortable with that, I would only recommend this, okay, is let's say that this is my icon right here, or my 3 icons, okay, is we're going to change the actual layers of the document, okay, so if you don't know how Google Slides or Google Drawings works with actual presenting, all of the formatting that you put on a paper are in layers. Okay, and this is why if you've ever been like really annoyed, like let's say I move this picture right here, okay, and you're clicking, and you can't click on a picture. If you've ever wondered why that is, it's because whatever your element you're interacting with, it's buried somewhere below on the layers, and so Google just thinks that you're trying to open up the top layer, and it doesn't understand what you're trying to do. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to turn your slide into basically being dead on it, okay, that nothing on it is clickable except for the icons that move them to specific pages. And this will prevent them from making mistakes. So here's how we do this, okay. We're going to take our icons here, and I'm going to make sure that you guys can see this just a little bit better, okay. And I'm going to shift click all of them. I just hold down shift and I click them. Okay, so then from that point, what I'm going to do is over here at arrange, okay, I'm going to go to order, and I'm going to go bring to front. Okay, for on Macs it's Command Shift and the up button. Now, when that says bring to front, that basically has moved those now to the top layer. Okay, so if you think about it this way, the picture that I have in the background, the text, those are all behind those pictures now. Okay, and you're going to see why we do this here in just a second. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a shape, okay, just a very basic box, and I'm going to draw it over the whole slide. You're like, why am I doing this? This makes no sense. Okay, now this slide right now, okay, we have our 3 buttons that are here. We have this big box that's now on top, so nothing on it right now is clickable. I'm going to take the fill color, make it transparent, take away the line. So now we have an invisible box that doesn't allow us to click on anything on the slides. Okay? But what we're going to do is we're going to move this box layer just under our 3 buttons so that the only thing that is clickable on the entire slide are just those 3 buttons. Okay? And the reason why I'm showing you this with my hands is because this all has to be done invisibly because the box is invisible. Okay? And just makes life so easy. And how you do this, okay, is you're going to click on this box. Again, all you have to do is just click on the screen, right, because it's that top layer. And you're going to hold Command, and then you're going to click down as many times as there are buttons on your screen, okay? So, for instance, if I go 1, 2, 3, you'll see that that gets us below the 3 buttons, okay? So, let's try it out here. 1, 2, 3. And to test this, okay, to see if you've done it right, I'm going to click everywhere on the screen, and you'll see I'm not able to click on any of the text. It's not highlighting blue. It's not doing anything. But if I go to the icons, I can click on those. Can't click on any of the text, but I can only click on the icons. And so we've done it right. And now why this matters is because basically when we try to click on the icons, that's all that works on the page. Okay, so there's one last thing that I'd kind of introduce to you as for kind of an additional challenge that you can do. And that's to introduce in your Choose Your Own Adventure game a scoring system or some kind of like meta-analysis of your students playing the game. Now, I generally always would recommend you to do some kind of like reflection afterwards, or some kind of like metacognitive exercise where they kind of think about the game and like why it forced them to do some choices and what the game was trying to teach them, and some kind of reflection. However, what I've done in this game, this will be kind of an example that you might be able to do in the future, is this game built in a scoring system. So the students can actually see the relationship between what I was measuring in this game as it went along. This is kind of, again, kind of an additional layer on top of a Choose Your Own Adventure game, but it could be, for example, like in math, where it's keeping score of a particular number or thing you're doing, or for example, like in English, if you're keeping track of a character and like things they've picked up along the way. Having something that travels with the students can be also another element that basically kind of takes your game to another level, so to speak. So, I know this has been a long-winded post, but hopefully it's been a good introduction on how to make a Choose Your Own Adventure game with planning and then executing it through Google Slides. Until next time, see you guys later.